For Best Independent Game, the nominees are Cocoon, Dave the Diver, Dredge, Sea of Stars, and Viewfinder.
Ahoy and avast there, mateys. Batten down the hatches, because the 2023 Game Awards are on the horizon, and I've played all 5 of this year's nominees for Best Indie Game. If you're a fan of boats and fishing and creatures of the deep, then this is your year, because 3 of the 5 nominees are big-time nautical adventures. If you're more of a landlubber, I hope you prefer a thinkier, futuristic experience, because the other 2 nominees are colorful sci-fi puzzlers. Like always, award shows are just an excuse to talk about more games. Compared to last year, I feel these 5 nominees are on a much more equal footing. Last year had higher highs and lower lows, at least for me, but I enjoyed all 5 of this year's nominees, and in this video I'm going to review them all, rank them, and give you my prediction for this year's winner. There will be minor spoilers for all these games, so if that will stop you from enjoying them, proceed at your own peril. Anyway, leave a like and subscribe, and comment below with your favorite indie game of the year. Let's dive in. The first nominee is Cocoon, which by coincidence is also the first one I played and the only one I beat before the nominees were announced, because I played it for another video project I'm working on. Cocoon is a gorgeous little isometric puzzler from Jeff Carlson, the lead gameplay and puzzle designer on Inside and Limbo. In it, you carry interdimensional orbs around on your back, hopping in and out of vibrant thematic worlds with the overarching goal of making progress in the game. Like the other games that Carlson had a hand in, the narrative of Cocoon is enigmatic, wordless, and ominous. That's not to say that the gameplay ever feels directionless, but you more or less flow from moment to moment rather than feeling driven by any particular story arc. In fact, one of the things that Cocoon does best is gradually draw the player into the game world. There are no instructions and no tutorials per se, and the controls consist of the analog stick and a single button press. There's also a very gradual complexity ramp to the game's puzzles. At the start you only have to manage a single orange sphere, but by the end you're juggling 4 globes, each boasting a unique additional way to interact with the world around you. In the words of Carlson, the more complex you want something to be, the simpler you also have to make it. When you're making puzzles that have a very complex nature, it's nice to counter that with accessibility. I think this philosophy is foundational to good puzzle design, as there's nothing worse than puzzles where difficulty arises from confusion, controls, or unclear signaling to the player. In Cocoon, it's always clear what does what, and where certain orbs need to go, and that right there is the essence of most of Cocoon's trickiest puzzles. How do I get this orb over there, when it has to stay here to keep this walkway activated? This orb is inside of that orb, but I need to reverse it. How? How do I use this orb and that orb's abilities at the same time? The solutions require solid spatial reasoning and a careful understanding of how the world works. Aside from the puzzle design, the best part of Cocoon is the art direction. Each of the worlds has a unique and visually distinct design, from barren wastelands and slimy alien biospheres, to menacing factories and overgrown swamps. It's actually critical to the game design that these worlds are so distinctive, because it helps the player keep track of their position in the miniature multiverse. Flitting in and out of alien worlds is all the more interesting because of the striking visuals, and some of the background elements hint at a larger world and past catastrophe. Each world also ends with a pretty epic boss fight, all of which are intense sci-fi spectacles, like a tentacle monster with predator cloaking, a giant Metroid, and a massive mecha Mothra with a death ray. Speaking of boss fights, it's pretty weird that this game has boss fights, right? That's completely out of left field for a puzzle game, and I did not think I would like this, but it actually works. Although, side note, the trailer for this game, which I watched after playing, really emphasizes the action and the boss fights and completely undersells the world switching. So I guess if you watched that, you might be surprised that bosses are only about 5% of the experience, if that. The bosses are all action puzzles, a bit like Zelda bosses, with a tough but fair difficulty level. A few of the designs are really creative, and each victory rewards you with a new ability that unlocks new areas and new methods of puzzle solving. If I had any other criticism of Cocoon, it's that some of the puzzle solutions, especially the ones involving companion robots, are a bit rote. As in, I recognize the solution, and then it takes a few minutes to actually execute the solution. That's a bit tedious, but I'm not exactly sure how to fix it without redesigning those puzzles from the ground up. It's a minor criticism and something that comes up in a ton of puzzle games, but there you go. Overall, I really enjoyed Cocoon, and I like the fact that the game is only about 4 hours long. That's the perfect length for a game like this, and of all the nominees this year, I'd have to say Cocoon is also the most original concept. Our second nominee is Dave the Diver, which, depending on who you ask, including the studio that developed the game, is not an indie game at all. That is because the developer, Mint Rocket, is a subsidiary of Nexon, a publicly traded company with over 7,000 employees. Here's what Jeff Keighley had to say on the subject. You can argue it either way. It's independent in spirit, and that it's a small game with a, I don't know what the budget is, relatively small budget, but it's from a larger entity, whereas there are other games on that list from much smaller studios. It's a really complicated thing to figure out and come up with strict rules around it, so we just let people use their best judgment. Look, that's obviously a waffly sort of non-answer, but I basically agree with what he had to say. There is, on the one hand, the Indian spirit, indie as an aesthetic, off-the-beaten-path screwball storytelling genre of which this game is definitely a representative, and on the other hand, the literal definition of developers independent from financial support and creative oversight. In 2023, it's more blurred than ever, but as long as games are made with care and creativity and aren't obvious cash grabs, I can celebrate a wacky diving and sushi sim regardless of origin story. Either way, I didn't pick the nominees, so I'm just here to talk about my experience with the game. Dave the Diver is about a schlubby but kind-hearted diver called Dave, who gets roped into starting a sushi restaurant with his business-savvy friend Cobra and prodigious sushi chef Bancho. Every morning and afternoon, you plunge into the blue hole depths and harpoon to death a string of increasingly vicious, endangered, and probably mercury-riddled marine creatures to use as ingredients in your burgeoning sushi bar. There's also boss fights, pirates, sunken wrecks to explore, and a mystery involving the ocean-dwelling sea people. At night, you tend bar and serve high-priced sushi to a parade of hungry customers. You can also hire staff, improve the menu, upgrade the interior, and increase the restaurant's social media presence. In concept, Dave the Diver is a lot like Moonlighter, an economic fantasy sim in which you do a dungeon crawl each night in search of loot to hawk in your Yield adventurer's shop. Or even last year's Cult of the Lamb, where you embark on crusades in the woods and find materials and followers to add to your unholy commune, which you then manage. The common thread, of course, being a game split between a tycoon game and roguelike combat runs with enemies and treasures and bosses. However, I feel that Dave the Diver marries these wildly disparate experiences more successfully than either Moonlighter or Cult of the Lamb. The main pitfall of this concept is that one half of the game can end up subsuming the other half, either because it's more interesting, better designed, or simply a larger part of the experience. I was initially expecting to lose interest in the sushi bar as Dave the Diver went on, but that never happened, and I think it's largely due to the engaging cast of characters. My favorite character is Bancho himself, the intense head chef on a personal quest to master the art of sushi, deliver fresh flavors that represent the sea, and redeem himself from a past fiasco involving a whole roasted shark head. Every once in a while, notable customers will visit the bar with personal orders, and it's your job to hunt down rare ingredients so Bancho can blow their minds with flavor. Some of these NPCs become pivotal characters in their own right after being won over by delicious sushi, providing Dave with access to new hiring resources, bar staff, fisheries, and a vegetable farm. Outside the bar, you can buy weapons from Duff, the self-described otaku, perform ecological research missions for Ellie, the biology grad student, or report archaeological finds to Dr. Bacon, not to mention ally yourself with the royal family of the Sea People. The entire game, and especially some of the character cutscenes, have a real anime feel, which I think absolutely works. Of course, most of the game is spent underwater, but a lot of your goals are driven by the goings-on at the restaurant. Money from the restaurant can in turn be spent on diving upgrades, like increased oxygen or carry capacity, a deeper maximum depth, or a more lethal harpoon gun. The dives play like roguelike adventures. You can collect weapons and upgrades that mysteriously disappear when you resurface, and you can keep going until you either run out of oxygen or decide to return to the surface. If you run out of oxygen, which also represents your health and can be depleted by shark attacks or jellyfish shocks, you lose all but one fish in your inventory. I feel like this is the best kind of video game consequence for dying. In some games, death is a meaningless slap on the wrist and an instant re-rack, while in others it makes you redo huge amounts of content, which sucks. But losing your stuff is a good consequence that adds tension without being too obnoxious. It creates a real push-your-luck dilemma. With rare or expensive fish in your inventory, do you dive deeper and maximize the hours in the day at the risk of losing your catch, or do you play it safe and return to the surface with a half-full inventory? There's also a fairly massive narrative involving sea people and underwater ruins, boss fights against giant squids and hermit crabs, and an illegal poaching operation. I don't know, the more I think about it, I'm just impressed by how well all the parts of this game work together. Couple last thoughts. I really dig the art style of Dave the Diver. It's pixel art, but a lot of the sprites and some of the cutscenes feel like 3D graphics with a pixel art filter, if that makes sense. The cutscenes are really good, and they look great. There is an atmosphere in this game of, and now for something completely different. At various points you embark on a stealth mission, bet on seahorse races, play a full-fledged rhythm game in a weird weeaboo dreamscape, or attempt to keep a virtual fish alive in an in-game Tamagotchi app. I was continuously impressed and surprised by just how much content is in this game, and it held my interest throughout the story. I also like games that get you invested in weird things, and you know, who knew it'd be this much fun to run a sushi bar? Next up is Dredge, which is the only game on this list that was personally recommended to me by a friend. Dredge is a Lovecraftian fishing adventure about commercial trawling, midnight madness, and eldritch creatures of the deep. You play as a grizzled fisherman who plies his trade in a bizarre archipelago comprised of bioluminescent reefs, towering stone pillars, labyrinthine mangrove tunnels, an active volcano, and several macabre New England towns. At its core, Dredge is about fishing for profit, upgrading your vessel and fishing some more. But it soon becomes clear that something's rotten in the state of Denmark, and not just the fish. If you venture out at night, or endure prolonged periods without sleep, strange insanity effects begin to take hold. Rocks and obstacles appear out of nowhere, phantom ships or islands appear in the distance, devilish leviathans pursue your vessel, and only sleep and daylight can stave off the madness. Additionally, grotesque variations of fish, aberrations, appear in the waters around the Marrows. As the game unfolds, you'll fulfill quests and perform errands for local residents, uncover a host of secrets, piece together the tragic tale of two newlyweds from messages and floating bottles, and form an unholy alliance with a mysterious collector who tasks you with dredging up relics from the four corners of the map. The story of Dredge is pretty good, I think. It's not ultimately a huge part of the game, but I think it's exactly the right kind of story for this kind of game, and I think both of the possible endings work perfectly. I also like that each of the 4 subregions has its own story going on, all of which feel a bit like mysteries. A huge driving force in this game is the desire to uncover backstory, discover secrets, and solve problems in each of the main regions. But I think the very best part of Dredge is the atmosphere. The different island chains all feel unique and present unique difficulties. The music and sound design are chilling and ominous. Best of all is the thick fog that pervades the world of Dredge. It's oppressive and claustrophobic, and apparently the result of some malevolent event that predates the story. If there's fear to be had in Dredge, it comes primarily from not being able to see what's around you through dense thickets of fog. To counter this, the central landmark in Dredge is a towering lighthouse that can be seen from pretty much everywhere on the map. This is a neat thematic touch, but also a good functional decision, as it helps the player get their bearings anywhere at sea. I suppose the biggest criticism of Dredge is that it's very easy. First of all, nothing that terrifying ever happens at night, so madness is more of an atmospheric thing than an actual threat. Also, you can sleep whenever and tackle the night in short bursts if you really don't like it, and there's no reason to go too long without sleep since the game has no time limit that I'm aware of, and you can just nap the second the panic meter gets too high. I like the fact that there are many different fishing minigames for the many different types of fish, but none of them are actually difficult, and most have no fail state at all. In most cases, there is no way to lose the fish on the line, and the only penalty for fumbling the catch is more time expended. But as I just discussed, this is a pretty toothless consequence. Even the bigger and rarer fish aren't really harder to catch, so it's more about finding them than anything else. Additionally, there's nothing stopping you from grinding out boat upgrades at any point in the game, and you can upgrade your boat to absurd levels of durability and speed that pretty much neutralize most threats. To be fair, I did not collect every single fish in the game, and I also have not played the Pale Reach DLC, so if either of those feats are any more difficult, let me know in the comments. Honestly, when I pull back the lens, there isn't a lot here that's innovative, original, or particularly mind-blowing, but there are a lot of simple joys that make Dredge a ton of fun to play. I like piloting a boat around a mysterious sea and discovering new areas and secrets. I like the collectathon of catching every fish and the anticipation of checking a new fishing spot or a crab pot in hopes of encountering some new mutant fish variant. The core gameplay loop of selling fish to make money, to upgrade your ship, to catch and haul even more types of fish is incredibly satisfying, and I was excited for every new upgrade. I also like the puzzle of arranging ship parts and trinkets and hammerhead sharks in your cargo bay. Finally, fishing is fun. Not in real life so much, where it's mostly sitting around, but what an all-time classic video game trope. What do Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing, Red Dead Redemption, Ocarina of Time, Dave the Diver, Dredge, and Sea of Stars all have in common? The fishing. I don't care if the fishing is easy in Dredge, it's fun and addicting to engage with a fishing minigame and pull a fresh catch out of the ocean. None of these mechanisms are exactly groundbreaking, but I always had goals and ambitions and mysteries I was looking to solve that kept me engaged, and more importantly, enjoying the game. The next game is the big one, Sea of Stars. Sea of Stars is an ambitious homage to 16-bit JRPGs from developer Sabotage Studio, who also developed 2018's The Messenger. It follows the world-spanning adventures of Solstice warriors Zale and Valere, a solar blade dancer and lunar monk, respectively, who graduate from Zenith Academy and leave their hometown behind to protect the world from eldritch monsters called Dwellers, whose only vulnerability is to solar magic during an eclipse. On this quest, Zale and Valere are accompanied by their childhood friend and warrior cook, Garl, and like any good RPG, the trio encounter a host of other characters, both allies and adversaries, along the way. It's full of all the tropes you know and love, like exploration, turn-based combat, leveling up, epic boss fights, side quests, secrets, and collectathons. And, in keeping with this year's theme, there's pirate ships and sea monsters, and of course, a fishing minigame. I'll start by saying this game looks and sounds absolutely incredible. I'm blown away by both the quality and the quantity of the art in this game, and the retro soundtrack is fantastic. There's a massive world to explore, a huge variety of enemies, a sprawling story with twists and turns, and if you're a fan of 90s RPGs like Chrono Trigger or Super Mario RPG, you'll appreciate a lot of the inspiration here. I'll also say my overall feelings towards RPGs are mixed. In general, I find them to be way too long and filled with a lot of tedium. But on the other hand, some of my all-time favorite games are giant RPGs with massive amounts of content. Thousand Year Door also has one of my favorite turn-based battle systems, and the Sea of Stars developers have specifically cited Paper Mario as an influence. So I guess I'd call myself cautiously optimistic about a new RPG from an indie studio with a great track record. And overall, I enjoyed Sea of Stars. I like the world and some of the original ideas on offer here. I'm wildly impressed by the art and the world design, and I had a fun adventure with some memorable characters. But I can't shake the feeling that this could have been a better game, and I'm prepared to talk about why. First of all, I was totally underwhelmed by the combat system. I liked it at first, and there are one or two clever ideas, like breaking an enemy's concentration with specific combos of elemental attacks, but 2/3 of the way through the game, combat still feels exactly the same as it felt at the start. Zale and Valere each start the game with 2 moves, and by the end of the game, they each know 3, plus an ultimate finisher and a few combo moves, but come on. There's no new strategy, no customization, just Moonerang and Sunball over and over again. That's a huge deal, because if I'm not enjoying the battle system, it makes whole swaths of the game that much more tedious. On top of that, none of the gear in this game is interesting at all. Every new weapon is just a straight upgrade, so you're obviously going to equip it. It would be way more interesting if a sword boasted high physical attack but lowered your magic, or boosted your magic but lowered your health or something. Make players think about their playstyle and choose a weapon that works for them. Secondly, I don't care about the 2 main characters at all. I never felt like they developed personalities, and I wasn't invested in either of them. I do like the other party characters, especially Garl and Sarai, but I feel like the main characters shouldn't be so whatever. And while I liked the world building and a lot of the supporting cast, I felt the actual story was kind of underwhelming. There were a few twists that I felt did not make sense, and the ending seemed more focused on teasing a sequel or a DLC than telling a complete story. And yes, I know this game is set in the universe of The Messenger, and Sabotage are probably developing more content in the same continuity for a big overarching narrative, but it still felt kinda anticlimactic. Finally, Sea of Stars is just too long, at least for me. And look, I've played significantly longer games that haven't felt this long, but the reason I've stayed engaged for the long haul in those games always comes back to gameplay. I feel like I need more than a narrative reason for a game to be this long. By the end of Sea of Stars, I was dodging fights left and right just to see the narrative through, because there was literally nothing to gain from these fights and no new moves or strategies or anything to make them intrinsically interesting. At that point, everything felt repetitive and I was trudging, man. All that said, I like Sea of Stars. The visuals and the supporting cast kept me invested in the game, and a few parts of the story were legitimately moving. The world building is really cool, and I do like that this game ties into the universe of The Messenger. I like the village of mole people. I like the time Garl cooks a giant loaf of bread in a volcano. And as you might expect, I liked Wheels, the push-your-luck roulette pub game with clockwork knights and archers and assassins. I was ultimately glad to experience Sea of Stars, but at the end of the day, it probably lands in the category of games I respect more than I enjoy. The last nominee is Viewfinder, a perspective and photography-themed puzzler with some light sci-fi elements. This is the only game that I had never heard of before the nominees were announced. In it, you navigate a complex simulation in which you can alter your surroundings by holding up photographs and essentially 3-dimensional stamping them onto the environment. That effect, which is very hard to describe without visuals, is both extremely impressive and the obvious hook of the game. Viewfinder is very reminiscent of Superliminal, which if you've never played is a similar length first-person puzzler set in a simulation and themed around altering the environment through trippy, perspective-based mechanisms. Some of the puzzles in Viewfinder are very similar to puzzles in Superliminal, particularly the ones that have to do with placing photographs nearer or farther to scale them up or down. That's not to say there isn't room for both games, but if there's a reason I was just a bit less blown away by Viewfinder, that reason is Superliminal. I think Viewfinder does a good job of iterating on its main idea throughout the game. At first you merely find pictures lying around to fuse with the environment, but later the game hands you a camera and lets you take your own pictures, which really unleashes some creative problem solving. Eventually you encounter photocopiers, timed stationary cameras, battery-powered portals, sound-activated sensors, and more, so the gameplay stays fresh and varied. I will say I didn't find this game to be that difficult. A lot of the times what makes puzzle games stick in my memory is that one puzzle, the one that seems fully impossible until it doesn't. The only puzzle that I got stuck on in Viewfinder for any length of time was the watermelon puzzle. But of course your mileage may vary. I still enjoyed all the puzzles, but my enjoyment came more from going, oh, that's clever, or that looks cool, than from feeling proud of my solution. More so than the puzzles themselves, I was impressed by some of the clever and creative visual effects, which are by far my favorite part of the game. There is a story in Viewfinder. Basically, the present day is experiencing a climate crisis, and you're in a simulation investigating the work of some scientists in hopes of finding a solution. There's also a cat who follows you around and offers some friendly banter and philosophical musings on the situation. This is one of those games where the so-called story is mostly recordings of characters presenting various views on such topics as the nature of reality, the inevitability of death and decay, and the value of the human experience. If you like that sort of thing, it may enhance your experience of Viewfinder, but if not, it certainly won't detract from it. I thought it was fine. Some random thoughts on the puzzle genre in general. So, comparing games is weird, and rating games is even weirder. If you start games at a 0 out of 10 and add points for things you like, you're more likely to prefer a game like Sea of Stars, which has an epic scope and takes some big swings, even if some of them are misses. If you think of games as potential 10 out of 10s and detract points for things you don't like, then you're more likely to prefer a game like Viewfinder, which is an extremely polished and creative experience with a clear vision and very few missteps. This discrepancy is a good reason not to rate games out of 10, but it also doesn't take into account differences in overall taste, which I think of in the same way gymnastic scores have to be multiplied by a difficulty factor. So this is just my personal taste, but for me, puzzle games are like a baseline 7 or 8. So to exceed that mark, they have to be an out-of-the-park 11 or 12 out of 10 masterpiece. Now, I showed this game to 2 people who both had the same reaction. After playing a few puzzles, they set down the controller and said, "This is really cool, but I get it." And that pretty much sums up my reaction to puzzle games in general. As a representative of the genre, Viewfinder is excellent. But as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't do anything to transcend my general opinion of puzzle games. I think if you've never played anything like this before, you will definitely be impressed by Viewfinder, and if you're a person who consumes every puzzle game that comes out, you will absolutely enjoy this one. But for me, it's a very good, but ultimately fairly standard puzzle experience. That said, one part of Viewfinder that I think is definitively a mistake is the end. Without spoiling the story or the solutions, Viewfinder ends with a timed puzzle gauntlet, where you have to solve 10 puzzles in 5 minutes, or else start the whole gauntlet over. I could see this really bothering someone who played Viewfinder for a more relaxing, meditative puzzle experience, and I didn't care for it much myself. It's one thing to time platformers or boss fights or anything else action-oriented, but thinking through puzzles while the clock ticks down adds nothing but annoyance when the time runs out and you have to start over from the beginning. Also, it's not like the solutions change on your second or third run at the gauntlet, so you end up just quickly going through the motions until you get back to the part you're stuck on. I would have rethought this one. But ultimately, that's a minor hiccup in a very solid puzzle game with some really clever ideas. Like I said, puzzle games rarely hit that greatness tier for me personally, but I really enjoyed this game for what it was. For me, this is the kind of game you sit down and play through once on a chill afternoon. There's a pleasant atmosphere, unique puzzles, and plenty of memorable visual spectacle. So if that's your jam, give Viewfinder a try. And that is all 5 nominees. As I said, I enjoyed them all, but I also wasn't completely wowed by any of the games this year. I don't feel too strongly about this, but I said I'd rank these, so here goes. In 5th place, which I feel a little bad about, is Viewfinder. There's nothing really wrong with this game and I would recommend it, but I had more fun with all the others. In 4th place, and this is probably my hottest take, Sea of Stars. This game is seriously impressive, and I really like some aspects of it, but I wanted it to be better, and I just feel like it falls short of the greatness it promised. It's still a good game, but it's not an all-time classic for me. In 3rd place, Cocoon. Cocoon is a very good game that I feel achieved the exact experience it set out to deliver. The puzzles are mind-bending and satisfying, the visuals are striking, and the atmosphere is ominous and tense and just exactly what they were going for. 2nd place, Dredge. In many ways, I would consider Cocoon to be a better game than Dredge, but I cannot deny the fact that I had more fun playing Dredge. Dredge is just a good time and a fun blend of themes, and my second favorite of the nominees. That means my favorite quote-unquote indie game at this year's Game Awards is Dave the Diver. There's just so much fun stuff in this one, not to mention a great cast of characters. The gameplay loop is terrific, it looks incredible, and the whole thing has a style and a charm to it that really stood out to me. That's my take, but as promised, I will attempt to remove my subjective lens and make a prediction. I'd say the 2 most likely winners this year are Sea of Stars and Dave the Diver, with Cocoon as a possible dark horse. But the way the winds are blowing and factoring in Dave the Diver's controversial indie status, I think Sea of Stars probably gets the win. I know a lot of people love this game, and it is undeniably impressive. But hey, we'll see. That's my prediction. By the time you're watching this, the Game Awards have likely already happened, so let me know what you think of the winner, or any of these games really. And on that note, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and check out other videos on the channel. I have another video coming fairly soon, so keep a weather eye on the horizon, and I'll catch you in the next one.